Hey, I'm Nicole. Welcome back to my channel, where this week I'm going to be making myself a very special dress to wear to an event on Friday. On Friday evening, I'm going out with my bestie to a live show, which is by somebody who I have been following on Instagram. She's one of my favorite people on Instagram at the moment. I thought I would make myself a special outfit for the occasion. I am a huge fan of African wax print fabrics. I have been for many, many years. It's one of my favorite fabrics to sew with. Shay, who is the lady who's doing the live show, is of Nigerian origin. And so I thought it might be quite a nice little nod to her heritage, and I just love making and sewing with these fabrics anyway. So we're hitting several birds with one stone here. Let me start by showing you the fabric I'm going to be using for this project. It is this striped Ankara or African wax print fabric. The thing that drew me to this, first of all, is the colors. I love this bright pop of red, this sort of turquoisey color, which I'm loving for spring summer at the moment. The motif on the blue does pick up that slightly sort of crackled traditional African wax print sort of look. So I like that. I like that there's a nod to that tradition, but without the fabric looking overtly like a traditional print. My plan is to make a dress, and the inspiration for the dress came from two separate sources, actually. The first is the flamenco styled skirt that we were asked to make on the Sewing Bee. 6 years ago, I was on the Great British Sewing Bee. In week 8, I believe, in our Made to Measure challenge, we were asked to make a flamenco inspired skirt. I actually ended up using a very traditional flamenco skirt pattern, which had those tiers and tiers of gorgeous flounces. And I actually made the skirt using a mix of two different African wax print fabrics. I absolutely loved making that skirt. And actually what I really loved about the idea of flouncing this fabric is that although it's currently in a series of stripes, by creating flounces with this fabric, by that I mean cutting circles out of the fabric and then spreading them out to create the flounce. The directionality of the stripes will just keep changing as the flounce goes around. So I just think it'll make it feel a lot more dynamic than just cutting them into straight strips of stripes and then gathering it. So that was one of the starting points for the inspiration for the dress. The other point of inspiration actually came from my live human Pinterest board. My friend Anna, who we met on Instagram, but we've become friends in real life. I call her my fashion muse. I absolutely love her style. One of the last times we got together, she was wearing a polka dot. It was a ready-to-wear skirt, but she hoiked it up because she's quite petite like me, and she wore it as a dress. It had the effect of a strapless dress, but with these 3 tiers of statement flounces, and I just thought it looked so cute. So I'm going to merge those two ideas into this one dress, and my idea is to make a strapless dress, which I will probably elasticate at the top just for ease, but I don't want it to be too elasticated. But from there will fall 3 tiers of flounces, which will be cut as circular flounces so that there's less bulk on the body of the dress, but they will just fall into these waves of gorgeous flounces. I'm also planning to add some gold piping to the bottom of each flounce, which is what I did on my flamenco skirt on the Sewing Bee. It just adds that little extra element of luxury. I mentioned in one of my previous videos on this channel that one of the ways I elevate my sewing projects is by adding little elements of gold. And I think adding the piping to the bottom of the flounces will also just really give it that sort of exaggerated clamshell type effect. I think it's going to look absolutely stunning. The shapes are going to be very simple. Really, the drama is going to come from the flounces and the print and the colors. I am on a little bit of a time crunch with this project. Today is Monday, the gig is on Friday. It should be enough time. But knowing me, my sewing projects often take longer than I think they would. So I'm starting it nice and early on Monday. I'm hoping that we'll get it nice and finished, that we can go at a nice steady pace and it'll get done in time without any panic for Friday evening. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Let's now talk through the pattern piece shapes that I am planning to cut out of the fabric in order to construct the dress. We are going for a dress that looks something like this. It'll be strapless, with a band at the top, which will be elasticated. We will have one flounce tier coming off of that. Then we will have another flounce tier and then a third flounce tier. Okay, this drawing does not look very brilliant, but you get the idea. Underneath those flounces, what we will have is some fabric. Actually, we probably don't need it to go that far. Probably end about there because the third flounce will be hidden underneath like that. Each of these lower 2 flounces will sit in a seam from there. So as far as pattern pieces go, we will need one pattern piece for that top band. So that will just be cut as a rectangle on the fold, and then we'll join them together at the sides. For these two pieces here, I will cut one piece which corresponds to the width of that top piece. I will probably make it into a bit of an A-line shape, and then the piece underneath here will fit onto that piece, and again probably be in a bit of an A-line shape. And so we will have those three, well, times two, because we have front and back, and that will become the structure under which we then attach the flounces. For the flounces, I am just going to free cut them from the fabric. So the flounces are going to be cut in big circles. I will make a cut up along like that, and then I will also cut a smaller circle in the middle. So once those two ends are opened out, that is what will create our flounce. And I'll have to join as many of these together as I need to in order to match them into this seam and also this seam. I am actually going to start by cutting out the flounces, because the width that I'm able to get on the flounces based on the width of the fabric will more or less determine how long this length ends up being. Because I'll want the flounce to cover at least 2 inches below this piece here so that you don't see the join. It gets covered by the flounce. So whatever this measurement ends up being, I will end up taking off something like 2 inches to get to this length here. So let's start by actually cutting out the first flounce, and then we will do our measuring, and then we will come back and draft this piece here. First thing I want to do is cut this fabric into squares, because then using those squares I'll be able to cut out a full circle from inside of it. The width of the fabric is about 114 centimeters from selvage to selvage, so I am going to measure 114 centimeters on the length, and I will cut my first piece, which is 114 centimeters wide by 114 centimeters long. Okay, so we now have our first piece, which is hopefully a perfect square. I'm just going to fold it in half and then fold it in quarters, and then we will start drawing our circular shape on it. What I'm going to do is measure this one side from the corner of where all the 4 sections fold to this edge. That is 56.5. That is just 56. So let's just go with 56. I am going to start from this corner, measure down to 56, and then I'm just going to make some markings. I'm going to keep my measuring tape just here. So this will be the sort of pivot point, this little corner here. And I'm just going to take the measuring tape and just go around making a mark where it's 56 centimeters away from that corner. It's a bit like using a compass, a makeshift compass. And the idea is that when we are done, we will have a perfect circle, which is 56 centimeters in radius. Now that I have that circle drawn out with my chalk, I am now going to cut it out. So starting from this side, just going to follow those chalk marks I made. And when that is opened out, it should form a perfect circle. So what we need to do now to finish off the flounce is to draw ourselves a perfect circle on the inside as well. That is what is going to spread out and become the top part of the flounce. Now, I obviously want to get a balance here, because I want to maximize the length I can have on the flounce, but also not have it so that it's so shallow that I don't get enough length across the top on each flounce. Just trying to work out how long ideally each flounce would be. Yeah, so if I want the total length of the dress to be somewhere near 96 centimeters, divided by 3, that gives 32 centimeters for each visible section of the flounce. But then I need to add a little bit more for the flounce to be inserted into a seam higher up than where the last flounce ended. I think we could make each flounce somewhere around 36 centimeters maybe. Because we've got 56 centimeters here, and obviously we need to account for seam allowances and so on. So I think we go 36 plus 2 is 38. So I think we could afford to cut 18 centimeters from the top of the flounce. If the dress ends up being a little bit shorter, I don't mind. It doesn't have to be floor length, and in fact floor length might be a little bit drowning on me, so I think let's go for 18 centimeters. I'm going to use the same method as before, just putting my measuring tape right in the corner there, and then just making a few markings 18 centimeters away from that. And then we will just cut that away. And then we need to make a cut up one side of the circle, because we just have one continuous circle at the moment, don't we? So let's just cut up this side. And here we have our first flounce. Magic. I'm just going to go ahead and cut a few more flounces, and then we will then work on cutting out the base part of the dress that the flounces are going to attach to. Just a note to say when you're cutting out the flounce, so here I have got the fabric folded into quarters. I have got my chalk mark here for the inside circle and then my chalk mark for the outside circle. Just make sure that the folded edges are on the sides of the flounce if you want it to be one continuous circle, because I just made the error, I mean it's not unusable, it just means I've got to join two pieces together, of having this cut edge as one side of my flounce, and then I ended up with two semicircles rather than one big circle. So just be mindful of that when you're cutting your own. So after all of that cutting, we have 6 circular flounce pieces cut out. I have made the top tier ones, front and back, a little bit shorter than the bottom ones because visually I want all the tiers to look the same length, but obviously the bottom 2 are going to be concealed in a seam underneath the top one. So I have added a bit more length on the lower tier ones. So with that cut out, we can now move on to constructing the bottom base section of the dress. What I have left are 2 rectangular offcuts, and we are now going to construct these together to just create one big rectangular tube that we're going to elasticate at the top and then cut into panels so that we can insert the flounces. Here you can see this piece here is a little bit longer, so I'm going to cut this one down so that it's the same width as that one. Obviously making sure that I've got enough ease in it to first of all get into the dress, but also to have movement, being able to walk and stuff like that. And I think it will be fine. We've got quite a good width on that. So let me go ahead now and cut this rectangle down to size, and then we will start constructing the dress from the top down. Let's now see about cutting out this top band for the dress out of the offcuts that we have left of the fabric. Initially, I thought we would cut it as one piece on the fold here, but thinking about it now, I'm wondering if we cut it in 2 pieces so that I can have a seam along the top into which I can insert a little trim. I'm just feeling like the top of the band needs a little flourish. It needs a little something, just so it's not so square across. In an ideal world, it might have been something like this metallic rickrack. I love this rickrack. It's got this gorgeous velvety texture and the gold edging. Something like that would have been absolutely perfect. But I don't actually have much more of this left. It's not going to be enough to go around the whole dress. So I'm wondering if we do a bit of improvisation. I've just got a plain black rickrack, and what I can do is just add some gold decorative stitching or something along the edge of it. And I think if we just insert that into the top of that band, just so there's a little scallop edge peeking out, I think that would add a really nice little detail. So let's cut that into 2 pieces. We just need to work out exactly what we want showing on the outside of the band. My instinct is to say, let's go with one of these blue panels edged with a little bit of red on each side, rather than, for example, going with the stripy one, which, yeah, I don't think it gives enough of a contrast there. And just the plain red, I think also is just a little bit too boring. So I think we go with this. I am planning to insert a 4cm wide elastic into the channel. So I think we cut 2 pieces, which will allow us to have the finished width of the band like that. We will insert the rickrack into the top, and the bottom we will insert the first tier and the first flounce. So let me just go ahead and cut these panels down to size first. As far as the width measurements, so this measurement here, I think I will go with my hip measurement. Obviously divide that by 2 to create a front and back with maybe a couple of centimeters ease. I don't want too much gathering on the top of the band. I want to keep that minimal, but obviously I need to be able to get the dress on over my hips. So I'm going to take my hip measurement, divide it by 2, add 2 centimeters, and add a further 2 centimeters for seam allowance, so add 4 centimeters in total, and that will become the width of our band. I have got those 4 pieces cut now. Now I am going to sew them together. I am going to join these 2 along each side so that they form a circular band, and that can become the outside of the top section of the dress. And I will do the same with these 2, sew them along these seams here, and then we will put these 2 together and insert the rickrack in between. And now I'm just going to press those seams open. So this is as far as we got today. I'm going to down tools now because I need to do a bit of editing and some other things this afternoon. So we have got the outside of the band, and this will be the inside. I've just gone ahead and stitched one of my labels in there while we've got the fabric flat. So the idea is that these will go wrong side to wrong side. When we come back in the morning, we are going to sew the two along that top edge, and we will be encasing a trim most likely, if not the rickrack, because I'm not sure how I feel about it. If it had some sort of metallic detail, I would have been a bit more keen, but just the plain black, I don't know. I don't know if that just looks a little bit underwhelming. So it might just be some gold piping or something, but anyway, we'll deal with that when we come back to this project in the morning. Here we go for day 2 working on this dress. What I'm doing this morning is working out the embellishment situation on the top of this band of the dress. I think we need something. We need a flourish at the top here because this is the bit that's really carrying the whole rest of the dress. There's obviously going to be drama with all the flounces and so on, but I do think there needs to be a flourish at the top. I am going to explore an idea which is a bit of a pain because it's just going to be fiddly and time consuming, but I think it would also look amazing. I am leaning towards the black rickrack, but I think the black rickrack on its own is a little bit underwhelming. It's just a little bit meh. I think it needs some gold. I did think about running some gold decorative stitching along the top of it, but I don't know that that will be quite enough. So what I am going to experiment with is adding this gold piping trim along the top edge. The reason I say it's going to be a pain is because obviously on the sewing machine, I've got to be negotiating all of these curves. I've got to be sewing piping right onto the edge of each of those up and down curves, which means I've got to clip into the piping trim, which was going to look really ugly on the other side, and therefore means that I will have to sandwich that piping in between two sections of this rickrack, so that we'll have a double layer of rickrack with the piping sandwich in between. So it's a lot of fiddly sewing, but I think actually that will be just the ticket. What I am going to do here is just cut myself a section of rickrack that is going to go all the way around this band with a little bit extra so that I can join it together. And now I'm going to take a section of piping, which ideally I would get a length that is long enough to go on the whole rickrack. But if I have to join some pieces together, that's fine too. In order for the piping to go around these curves, because this tape that the piping is attached to isn't particularly bendy, so I will have to cut into this tape in notches going along like that. Or I could have probably just cut that trim down because look, it's just falling out in chunks. Anyways, that will allow me to be able to bend it around these curves as I need to. Might be a little bit tight going around these bottom curves, but anyway, you see how amazing that will look? That will just look so amazing. So I think we will go through the pain of that exercise. I will sew the piping onto the rickrack first, and then I will cut another bit of rickrack, lay it on top so that I'm sandwiching the piping in between two layers of rickrack, and then I will just top stitch the two rickracks together. I think it'll be best if I sew the piping side underneath because I kind of need to see how I am bending it. When I had it on top, it was obviously impossible to see the top of the curve of the rickrack. I've got my one-sided zipper foot installed just so that I can put the piping just under the lip of the zipper foot. I'm going to move my needle, maybe one click to the left. I've taken my stitch length down as well to 3.0 just because we're going around some pretty tight curves here. Actually, I could probably leave my needle where it was on the right. Yeah. Because I kind of want it to be as close to the piping as possible. So obviously the main tricky thing here is just negotiating all of the curves of the rickrack. So having to constantly reposition the sewing foot. And this is where having a machine with a speed control is so handy because I can just set it to a slow speed and take my time. So I'm going to keep going around like that until I get to the end of the rickrack. Well, this was one of those jobs that I could not wait for it to end. I got to the end of the rickrack, but there's certain sections, particularly in the dips, where you can see the binding didn't quite grab on. Plus, it's been fraying like mad. So I don't know if I'd recommend you clipping into it like I did. If you are using a very similar piping to mine, I would suggest you maybe just trim it right down. What I'm doing now is to just secure these little bits that have come out. I'm just going to sort of tuck them back in, and I'm just doing a little straight stitch across where the rickrack dips there, just to tack that in place. The humps, as it were, the top bits came out okay, but it's the dips, the bottom bits, that were a little bit more tricky to do. So I'm literally just going straight across just to tack those little dips back in place. Alrighty, we are done with that. That was not a nice job. But anyway, sometimes the things that make the garment special require a lot of painful fiddly sewing. So what I'm going to do now, because if you look at the back side, that is not very nice. So I'm going to now sandwich another layer of rickrack on the back of that, and then we will be ready to insert it into the band. I'm just using my normal presser foot for this because we haven't really got as much of a lip on the piping now that we've inserted it. So I'm just going around and I'm just going to stitch that second rickrack as close to the piping as I can. We have got the rickrack ready to go now. It actually feels quite thick. So I have a decision to make here. Initially, I had thought this would be an elastic channel, but now that we're adding this scallop trim inside, what I don't know is once this gets gathered in through the elastic being tighter than the width of it, what that will do to this trim. I think it looks quite nice flat like this, but it may not look as nice when it's all elasticated and gathered in. If that is the case, if it looks naff, then what I will have to do is reduce the length of these bands so that they fit around that part of my body, just under my arms. Unfortunately, it means we will have to insert a zip into the dress if that is the case, because I won't be able to get this over my hips and I won't be able to get it over my head. So it'll need a zip, and I'm desperately trying to avoid that. Obviously, I can put zips in, but I loathe doing them. In terms of the sewing, I need to work out how much of this rickrack trim I want peeking out, because we can go as far as that really, but I think I want to try and get it so that it's fairly close to where the piping comes down at the bottom. So if I unfold that, it'll mean aligning the edge of the red fabric with the bottom of the rickrack trim where it dips here, and then I'll keep a 1 centimeter seam allowance away. So I will sew it this way on the machine with the fabric side up and then kind of hope for the best. Now I'm not really going to be able to see the markings on the plate here to see that I'm keeping a centimeter away. I know at the moment the needle is a centimeter away, so I'm going to use the edge of this red as my guide. I'm just going to align the fabric so that it goes right along these dips in the rickrack, and I'm going to keep about that distance away from the right hand edge of the red fabric. I'm using a really big stitch length here because I may need to unpick this either in places or completely. So I'm just sort of tacking it on for now with a big stitch, and then we will work out what we're going to do more permanently. I've got one side of it done. I am already going to need to unpick that because I didn't actually stitch it with the nice side of the rickrack on the right side. So I'll have to unpick that anyway. But my sense at the moment is that once that starts getting gathered in with elastic, I just don't think the top of that is going to look very nice. It's going to want to just start going all kind of bunchy and weird. And I just think laying flat like that, it looks so much more elegant. So I think I'll be moving to the closer fitting band, which unfortunately means inserting a zip, but is what it is. We've got to do what the garment wants. So let's unpick this and let's cut the bands down to size, and then let's carry on with our reconstruction. Let's go ahead and cut these bands down to the reduced size. I've worked out that I need to reduce the width by 6.5 centimeters. So I will just put my rotary cutter on 6.5. I will leave that side open because we need to insert a zip now, so I won't bother closing that up right now. On the other side, because I've already stitched my label in, obviously I can unpick it and move it, but it might just be easier to cut each of these edges down by 3.25, which is half of 6.5. Now that we are not making this a completely elasticated channel, I'm going to interface the bands. So I'm just going to cut some strips of 6 centimeter wide pieces of interfacing, and then I will interface the wrong sides of those bands. I have got those 2 bands interfaced, so let's now sew them together, enclosing the rickrack in the middle. So I will probably sew it on one side first and then use that stitch line as my guide to sew the other one. After that, this is what we have, and when that is turned to the right side, it's going to look like this. I absolutely love it. Love, 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 love the little pop of gold, the scallops. I just think it's going to look absolutely stunning. So I will just give those edges a press, and then we can move on to drafting and cutting the first tier of this dress. What I want to do now is just measure how long the band is. So with seam allowance in here of 1 centimeter, we've got 41 centimeters on that band, and we have got 41 on this one. So I am actually going to draft a pattern piece because it's just going to be easier for me cutting out, and also it's going to be easier for me in drafting the second tier as well. So let's go ahead and get the pattern paper out and we will draft the first tier. We have worked out what the width of the top part of the tier is going to be, but we now need to work out what the length is going to be. The backing of the first tier onto which the flounce is going to sit is going to be aligned with the flounce at the top. So if I measure what this flounce is, say it's 38.5 centimeters, but I want to make my tier about 6 centimeters shorter than that. Let's call that 38. So minus 6 will be 32. So if we make this first tier 32 centimeters, it'll be 32 centimeters long, and it will start off as 41 centimeters wide. Let's draw a line which is 41 centimeters across, and that does include seam allowances. Let's make this the center of the flounce. We want this to be 32 centimeters down. Will be here. So that is 41. So if we squared up from here, this would be a rectangle. But we obviously don't want a rectangle. I want to make this into an A-line shape. So I need to work out how much I want to angle that by. I think we go as much as that. I'm going to draw this line, which is 32 centimeters, because that is our finished length. And now I've got to just curve that back in, because when you draft an A-line, if I took this line straight out, then this edge would be longer. So I need to just smooth that back in. I'm just going to do that with my French curve. So now I'm going to put that on the fold along the center back or center front line. And then if I cut these two bits of paper together, then we'll have two symmetrical sides. Okay, so that is our pattern piece for the backing of the first tier. Let's go ahead and trace off from the bottom, and let's do the second tier down. I'm just going to measure what the bottom of this will be. So that will become the measurement of the top of the next tier. Just because it's slightly curved, I'm just putting the measuring tape that way. We've got 56.5 plus centimeter seam allowance on each side, so that'll be 58.5 centimeters. So we need to go across by 58.5 centimeters, and let's now work out how long it needs to be. Here we have our second tier flounce. Again, it'll start at the same point as the flounce, but then it'll want to be 6 centimeters shorter than where it finishes. So this flounce is 44.5 centimeters, so minus 6 will be 38.5 centimeters. So the length of that tier needs to be 38.5 centimeters by 58.5 centimeters. I now have the width and the length of that tier, but what I need to do now is work out the angle of the slope here. So I'm just going to lay the first flounce on top. Obviously they will join together like that so that the seam allowances meet together. And all I'm really interested in is just following the shape of this line here. So 38.5. Okay, so we've got the second tier drafted now. Let's go ahead and cut these pattern pieces out, and then we'll carry on the construction of our dress. Alrighty, I've got all the extra pieces cut out now. I've got the first tier and the second tier cut out. I am going to leave it there for today. When we come back tomorrow, we will start constructing all the pieces together. Here we go for day 3 working on this dress, and we are now at an exciting stage of development because we are ready to start actually constructing the dress. I have got the band fully constructed here now, and I've got the first tier pieces cut out, and I've also got the first tier flounces cut out. We need to attach the first tier onto the band, and we also need to attach at the same time the flounce in there as well. I have a feeling, now that I'm looking at the dimensions and everything, that we will have a lot more flounce than we need. So I was thinking that what we could do is do 2 layers of flounces. If I cut down one of these flounces by another, I don't know, maybe 2 centimeters or so, and then I will have 2 layers of flounce on each tier. It'll make the dress very heavy, but I would rather that than have all this fabric going to waste. Now, obviously, I couldn't have been that precise with the cutting of the flounces in terms of the length of it, so we will just have to sew it in and then chop off any excess or piece things together as we go along. I decided that I'm going to finish off all the raw edges inside the garment with some black bias binding. Normally I would French seam a woven cotton like this, but because we've got an invisible zip going in, and actually I didn't accommodate for enough seam allowance to do French seams anyway. I've only got a 1 centimeter seam allowance, but that makes life a little bit easier in terms of construction, because then I just sew the traditional way with right sides together, and then we'll just bind the raw edges on the inside. So I'm going to start off here, sewing this seam together, right sides together, then we will add our black binding inside. I have got that seam done now, so let's go ahead and put this tear and the flounce together, and then let's attach it to the outside of the band. I've just put the flounce all the way to the end, and we can fit one flounce across the whole length of front and back with this much excess. And I've obviously cut 2 flounces already, but anyway, like I said, we can now just double the flounce, so just have 2 layers of flounce per tier. To do that, I'm going to have to insert another flounce into the seam here, but I'm going to have to cut the other one down a little bit. I'm going to trim away just a little bit over 1 centimeter. Just going to eyeball it here. And now let's also insert that on top of this flounce. What I'm going to do is sew the 2 flounces together first. It'll make it easier for sewing the next step anyway. I've got those 2 flounces sewn together now, so I'm just going to go round and just try and even off the distance between the 2, because it's gone a little bit skew-whiff in places, or many places. Again, I'm just sort of eyeballing it. I've got all those edges trimmed down to size, and I quite like how you get this little peek of the pattern of the dress just going in lots of different directions underneath there. So now let's go ahead and attach the band and the first tier to the flounces. We're just going to put these together. I'm going to pin all along, and then I will take it to the machine, and we will sew all of these layers together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Oh no, I got halfway through stitching this band on, and then I suddenly thought what I could really do with is some gold piping under here, just to edge off the top and bottom of the band with some gold piping. So I'm going to unpick that. I'm going to sew some gold piping to the band, and then I will come back and sew everything together. You can see that when that turns back to the right side, what you'll have is that little bit of piping showing just there. First tier is coming along. Let's just go ahead and rip the plaster off and insert the zip at this point. We're going to do an invisible zip. I'm going to use this black one here. We are going to start the zip at the top of the band, but we're just going to open it out like this while we insert it. And I've just notched the flounces a little bit just because we need to French seam those, but I will work out how we do that in a sec. I've got my invisible zip foot installed, and I'm sewing through all 3 layers. So the 2 flounces and the bottom tier, I'm just sewing them all together as I come down the zip here. We've got the zip inserted on this side. I've just made myself a little marking so I know where I stopped the stitching on this side, and on the other side of the zipper tape where I need to stop on that side. So let's now attach the zip to the other side. We need to match up the piping here as well. We need to make sure that when that is zipped up, that those 2 bits of piping are going to match. What I'm going to do is just sew the zipper tape here first, because I want to zip it up and just double check that those bits of piping are going to match before I commit to doing the whole thing. Okay, let's zip that up and see if that's going to match. Just a tiny smidge too high, so I might just have a go again just to get it bang on. Let's go ahead and just close up the bottom of the zip now. I'm going to start doing that with all of the layers together, which is the tier and the flounces. But then I will need to work out how I separate them, so the flounces just sit independently, and then I can close up the tier as well. Alrighty, after a bit of problem solving, we are there with the zip. Sorry, I went and skipped ahead because I wasn't even sure how I was going to do this. So I didn't want to explain something and then realize I couldn't do it that way. But we now have the zip in, and we've got flounce 1, French seamed, flounce 2, French seamed, and then we have the first tier backing, and I've put some bias binding all the way on the inside. Let's go ahead now and attach the second tier down. It should all get a bit more straightforward from here. The trickiest bit, I think, was putting the zip in with the flounces. What I'm going to do now is construct the second tier of the dress. We will sew the second tier with right sides together, and then we will do our binding. I don't know why I've never thought of this before, but I am just stitching the 2 layers of fabric together with the bias binding in one go. I used to sew the seam of the fabric and then I used to sew the bias binding on, but I suddenly thought, skip a step. I've got the fabric pinned together because I wanted to match up the stripes. Not that it matters hugely because it's going to be hidden by the flounce anyway, but you know, some habits die hard. But yeah, that low-key is such a genius hack I never thought of before. Just stitching the bias binding as the seam. Getting to the end of day 3, still so much sewing to do. I am now constructing what is going to be the bottom 3rd tier flounce. Yeah, a lot of sewing because I'm having to piece some offcuts together to create all these 2nd layer flounces, and I'm French seaming them, so yeah, it's a lot of sewing. So far what we've got is the 1st tier kind of constructed, 2nd tier outer flounce constructed, 3rd tier outer flounce constructed, now piecing together the 2nd and 3rd tier bottom flounces, and then tomorrow I shall be able to assemble everything. So yeah, it's gonna be a bit tight. Welcome to day 4 of working on this dress. I'm just looking more and more disheveled as the days go on. We have got a motor today because I am going to aim to get the dress finished today if possible, because I want to be editing tomorrow in order to share this with you on Saturday, posting schedule and all that. Anyways, we have still got a lot of sewing to do, but I think we're over the hardest bits of it. What I'm going to be doing right now is piecing together the last offcuts of flounces that I have in order to create the bottom flounce for the 2nd tier. We've got all the other flounces constructed actually. So once we've done this, we can start putting the rest of the dress together. The reason I say it's going to be a lot of sewing is we've got miles and miles and miles of hemming to do, and we will have miles and miles and miles of pressing to do afterwards, because the way I'm planning to do the hem is going to involve overlocking, piping, and pressing. Okay, let's attach the 2nd tier now. We've got the base of the 2nd tier and we have got the 2 flounces. That's what we're looking like all pinned together. I know it just looks like one big jumbled mess, but what I ended up doing actually was sewing the tier 2 base and 2 flounces together first, and then I pinned those 3 stitched layers onto the tier 1. So let's go ahead and stitch that together now all the way around, and then we will attach tier number 3. Okay, I've got the 3rd tier flounces sewn together. So now we are going to attach that to the 2nd tier. We're going to do that again, right sides together, and then we'll sew it together in the round. Okay, we are making pretty good headway with this now. We've just got a few things left to do. We've got to finish off the facing on the inside here. We've got to just attach it down to the zip and close it down on the inside. So maybe we'll just do that next. And then we've got reams and reams of hemming to do on all of these flounces. But let's start with stitching down the facing here. The way that's going to happen is I'm going to turn the facing to the band right sides together. I'm going to move the little zippy tab here out of the way, and then I am going to stitch this down a little bit further away from the zipper teeth than it was sewn on the outside, and then when that's turned right sides together, that should create a nice finish there. Okay, we've got the facing stitched down and hand stitched closed. So we now need to do miles and miles and miles of hemming. We need to hem 6 of these flounces. The way I'm planning to do that is to first just overlock the raw edges, and then I am going to sew some of this gold piping right onto the edge. So the overlocked edge will turn under and be hidden by the trim of the piping, and then we'll just have the gold piping edging the flounces all the way across. Let the games begin. All the overlocking's done, so I'm just inserting the piping now. It's 11 p.m. I decided to stay up tonight to finish the dress. I haven't got a huge amount left to do. I'm just doing the bias binding finishing on the inside. I've got all the piping on. I just need to do a bit of pressing and just finishing off just where the piping bits meet each other here. That just needs to be nicened up. But yes, not too much left to do. I reckon I should be done by midnight, hopefully. And then we can go to bed and do our final try on in the morning. Exciting times. And now, after 4 solid days of work, we finally have our completed dress. Well, almost completed. We've just got One last job to do here, which I will have to wait for some binding to turn up, but just where I've decided to leave the black edge of the piping on the bottom of the hem, we need to finish that off nicely. It will be fine for tonight. No one's going to really notice that. There's so much else going on in the dress, but just for your benefit, you can see just here where I have joined the bits of piping together. Obviously, initially, I was not planning for that to be visible. I was planning to have the gold piping turned back like that so that you would just have the gold edge on the bottom. But can you see how that doesn't have really quite as much impact as having the black edging, which just defines the flounces that little bit more and just adds a little echo to the trim on the top. I think it just accentuates the flounces even more, and that's, I think, a good thing on the dress. So I have ordered some bias binding, some black bias binding, which is a little bit thinner than the one I've used inside the dress because I don't want the black edging to be any wider than it currently is. When that arrives, I will finish that off. So that is our finished dress. I will show you a little close-up of all the details. We've got the rickrack trim on top here, which we have the piping sandwiched in. We have our strapless band here with the gold piping at the bottom as well. We've got our 3 tiers of double flounces going down the dress. And I will also show you what the dress looks like on the inside. Because, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, one of the ways I elevate my sewing is by really making sure I do some really nice finishings on the inside. This is the invisible zip. We've got binding going all down that seam. We've got bound edges all on the seams inside as well. And I hand stitched down the facing on the strapless band. We have also got French seams on all of the flounces. So that is our dress. Do we go in for a little final try on now, or do I save that for our get ready with me in another video? Let's go for one final try on. Here is how she looks on the body. I absolutely love it. Love it, love it, love it. This is exactly what I had envisioned when I set out on this project. I love the drama of the flounces. I'm really glad I didn't end up going with the elasticated idea up here because I just think the smooth strapless band here with the rickrack is just so much more elegant than just going with a bunched up elasticated top there. The gold edging on the flounces just adds a little element of luxury. The black edging just defines the flounces and gives it that little bit more drama. She's got so much swish. And can you see how by me cutting the flounces out in circles and changing the directionality of the stripes just makes the print feel more alive and dynamic than if we just went with straight stripes all the way across. So yeah, 4 days of solid work, but another gorgeous Ankara dress that I can add to my collection, and one that I think I will definitely treasure forever. I feel like such a queen in these dresses, honestly, and I absolutely love making them. It's a real labor of love, but when they get done, they really are absolutely incredible. Still can't believe she is staying up without any assistance. I might just have to sort of give her a little bit of a hoik in the front from time to time, but she's staying up quite well, really. We've got a little invisible zip down the side here. I was thinking about adding a bit more of a statement pull on the zip, but just because it's right under my arm, maybe not. So I will be styling up the dress to go out for Shay's live show tonight. So stay tuned for that video, which will be coming to my Instagram and my YouTube shorts over the next few days. But for now, here is the finished dress. I hope you enjoyed the project. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.